Welcome to Pickwick Monthly. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And my Pickwickian co-host for today is Jacob Romanow. Jake, welcome back.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Romanow. Why do I keep forgetting this?
Romanow.
Thank you.
Rhymes with domino.
I'm sorry. Like you're on every 4 months. It's like I gotta keep.
You know.
All right.
Pause. We're all used to it.
Yeah. Everyone, for 20 months, we are talking about Charles Dickens's The Posthumous Papers of the Pickwick Club, as it was first serialized monthly from March 1836 to October 1837, and once a month, myself and one of a rotating set of co-hosts talk about the serialized part and a kind of conversational annotation. In today's episode, number 8, they are chapters 21 to 23. We get a harrowing tale of revenge, which really is so different than everything else. And then we get what we expect to get. We get Mr. Pickwick caught in the bedchamber of the lady in yellow curl papers. And thank goodness we have Tony Weller, Sam's father, dispensing wisdom to all. If you are watching live right now, please like and subscribe and have fun in the live chat. If you're watching the recording, please like and subscribe. And I would love for you to leave comments or questions if you're just watching the recording, and I will get back to you with those. Well, Jake, it's been a few months. What's new with you? Is that a Dickens shirt that you're wearing there?
It is. I have my Little Dorrit Dickens Universe t-shirt here. Got a big celebration of a kind.
That's the Dickens universe that you were at. Did you lead a group there or something?
That's right. Yeah. So a lot of fun out there. I believe they're doing Great Expectations next year, so a lot of temptation there. But
yeah, I've not been out to Dickens Universe yet. We have some people to watch the show who have done those, and I've always thought of it. And it's funny. I was really close to going pandemic year, and then clearly everything was canceled. Everything went on. I did it online, but I didn't get to go. One of these years, I will make it out there. A lot of fun. And what else have you been doing? Well, you've moved now. You're out of the area where I'm in, out of the Rosenbach, the Philadelphia area. But yes, before you left, did you pay any visits?
Well, I couldn't leave Philadelphia without visiting Grip over at the Free Library, which was quite a kick, quite a pilgrimage. I love the I don't know how many of our listeners have been over there to see this infamous literary raven.
The Free Library of Philadelphia, the Rare Book Department, has really one of the greatest Dickens collections in the world. A lot of it through is it Harry Elkins? I'm trying to think of his first name. Who was a big Dickens collector, and who Dr. Rosenbach, helped, buy lots of things in his collection as well. I think their Pickwick Papers there in serial parts is the Pickwick Papers that Dickens was giving every month to his sister-in-law, Mary, to Catherine's sister, and it has her name on the front covers, at least up until we know that she dies while they're writing it. And but they have that issue of Pickwick Papers and everything, and they have Grip. Dickens's pet raven, who was also very likely the inspiration that Poe used for his poem, The Raven. So it's a shame.
He's kind of stuffed up in a corner of the top floor, and you would never know until you went to find it.
Yeah.
There's quite a bit of Dickensiana up there. There's also the tombstone.
For Dick, the best of birds.
Yes.
Dickens was lots of pets, loved having animals, and unusual animals too, like Grip the Raven. And the Grip was only there were 3 ravens, I think he may have had. Somebody may correct me in the chat if they know. It was William Elkins, who was the Dickens collector, Harry Widener's first cousin. And thank you to somebody in the chat for letting me know that. But he had more than one raven, and Grip was particularly feisty, liked to bite people all the time. And also, you know, I think Grip was the one was eating the paint, lead paint, and died from lead poisoning. But people don't realize that ravens can speak. And if you've ever seen, and Dickens could as well, and if you've ever seen, or like you go online and watch a video of a raven speak, it's really uncanny. It's not like a parrot, like some bizarre, it sounds like a person saying a word, and it's just weird to see. And Dickens put Grip into the novel Barnaby Rudge, and even named, he's Barnaby Rudge's, you know, pet raven, who whenever Barnaby's talking to him, he'll ask him questions, and the raven will just croak, "Nobody," is his answer all the time. And hence, you know, one of the reasons that the connections to Poe's Nevermore bird is the bird that keeps chanting "nobody" when asked questions. It's never been written down. Poe never said that he got the idea from Dickens. Dickens never said it either. But the fact that not only did they meet in Philadelphia when Dickens was here and corresponded, Poe reviewed all of Dickens's early novels, including Barnaby Rudge. So Poe knew the novel well. So there you have it. So, and then when Dickens, I'm sorry, I was going on and on now. It's connected to Poe stuff, so I love it. Grip dies, and Dickens loves him so much that he has him stuffed for the family. And that, though, you know, in the rare books department, that's actually not part of the Dickens collection. That's part of the Poe collection, another fabulous collection they have, originally started by Colonel Richard Gimble, who had a great Poe collection. When he saw it go up for auction, he recognized the Poe connection and bought it. And that's how it rests there. So perfect place for it now with the Dickens and the Poe collections there.
There you go.
So so well done. It's you can't live in Philly for any period of time as a literary person, I don't think, and not get over to meet Grip at least at some point. So well, let's get started, Jake. Let's get started on this part here. We're at number 8. It was published at the end of October 1836. At the time, Dickens's play The Strange Gentleman was on the stage. We've been talking about that for the last couple episodes, especially last time with James. He and I were talking about that play, how it did very well. And Dickens had to be thinking at this point, maybe I'm going to be a playwright. He's got that play selling well that's going to be performed for like 50 straight performances. He's got another play starting in the beginning of December, The Village Coquette, and perhaps it's that play that then reminds me, like, yeah, you're not a playwright. So that one doesn't go over very well, and he's doing far too well doing fiction. He's editing his earlier sketches and writing new ones for a publication of the second series of Sketches by Boz. The first series had already been published just before Pickwick had come out in February 1836. And now he's got a second series coming out in book form. And then he's also going to start monthly serializing Sketches by Boz. This is one of the things I love about Dickens, Jake, is that he maximizes the formats for everything that he does. So if he's published Sketches by Boz in a different form, in book form, he knows that now that he's doing these monthly serials, I'll also publish it in monthly serials for then people to buy it there. It was also published in other publications where they could get it as well. And he'll wind up doing the same thing with Oliver Twist. He starts it in Bentley's Miscellany, a monthly magazine, and then later in life, like a couple decades later, he re-releases Oliver Twist in the monthlies to match all of his other monthlies.
And keeps doing so over the course of his whole career. He keeps republishing the versions of the works or of the Pickwick and everything else.
He'll revise his preface. We'll mention his preface later, for one of his later prefaces for this. And Dickens is constantly finding ways to, how do I get more readers? How do I get more readers? So, and he's also, Cruikshank has done already illustrations for Sketches by Boz, and he's working on new ones for this second series. And I love this exchange. There's a letter that Cruikshank has written to Dickens, and George Cruikshank is arguably the greatest illustrator of that first half of the 19th century in England. He will illustrate Oliver Twist coming up as Dickens's second book. But he's not somebody that's going to be pushed around, Cruikshank, by this young upstart writer as Dickens' other illustrators are. And he writes to the publisher, John McCrone, who's publishing the sketches. Cruikshank writes that he might have the privilege of suggesting any little alteration to suit the pencil. That Cruikshank is like thinking, well, let me tell you what to write when I do this illustration. And Dickens's response to McCrone, he doesn't send this to Cruikshank, he sends it to McCrone. He says, I have long believed Cruikshank to be mad, and his letter therefore surprises me not a jot. If you have any further communication with him, you will greatly oblige me by saying from me that I am very much amused at the notion of his altering my manuscript, and that had it fallen into his hands, I should have preserved his emendations as curiosities of literature. Most decidedly am I of opinion that he may just go to the devil. And so far as I have any interest in the book, I positively object to his touching it. Now, McCrone smoothed it out. Dickens is like, and he's the kid, right? This is like the first thing that he's done. And he thinks, no, I'm calling all the shots. Second series of sketches will be published in December with Cruikshank's illustrations and Dickens's unaltered text. So Cruikshank then winds up not wanting to touch it either. So, all right, that's what's going on in Dickens' life at the time. And let's get into this part number 8. Remind everybody, last month, Dickens had been to visit the law offices of Dodson and Fogg in his case against Mrs. Bardell. And in trying to reach his own lawyer, Mr. Perker, Pickwick, and Sam wind up at the Magpie and Stump, a pub for lawyers, clerks, and then there's an older clerk that gets up and he's going to tell a story right at the end of the last part. And that's what we'll start with in this. But before then, just a reminder that this, again, the interpolated tales. This is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the 6th interpolated tale in 8 parts. That's a lot. Now he'll do this again in other books, but the whole beginning of, and then we'll have another one in part 10 for the Christmas issue. I think they calmed down in the second half of this run. But I'm fascinated, Jake, by the topics of these and how almost all of them have to deal with, well, here it is. The Stroller's Tale was the first one in number 2, and that was about drink, madness, and death. The Convict's Return in number 3 was about vice, expulsion, and death. The Madman's Manuscript in number 4 was about madness and death. It was also very gothic. The Bagman's Story then, with Tom Smart and the Queer Chair, there was some kind of romantic love in that, but it was also supernatural. Not scary, but at least you got some supernatural in it. And then the odd one out is The Parish Clerk, which came in number 6. That's a tale of true love. And that's literally what it's called, The Parish Clerk, A Tale of True Love. And it's just a romance, a romantic love story, and a comedy. Although I think there's connections with the two Washington Irving's Legend of Sleepy Hollow, but Dickens doesn't use any supernatural in it.
Yeah, but we might also, I mean, it's a love story of a kind that we don't really get in the main body of the text here either.
Yeah.
So, one thing people often say about ghost stories, right, is that they're kind of the cultural unconscious or something like that. And there is a way, I think, that all of these interpolated tales are kind of doing something with the unconscious of this novel, right? It's the stuff that can't make it into the Pickwickian journeys or the comic, lighthearted, although lovable adventures that constitute the main text. The death and the scariness and the fear is one element of that. But I think any kind of sort of serious emotional intensity gets kind of put into these, at least in the first part of the novel, gets really consolidated into these interpolations.
And this one is so starkly contrasted to not just the rest of what's going on in this part, this monthly part, but like the novel itself. Well, I don't know. Maybe it may be a lot like that first Stroller's Tale with the old actors, the old actor kind of battling alcohol and then dying. Well, we'll see. I just think it's even more extreme than that one.
Well, it's also interesting that it kicks off this number, and it really more abruptly. I think I might be forgetting one, but I think it's really the most abrupt beginning of a serialized part that we've gotten yet. Between the combination of this sort of mid-sentence opening that we get, and Dickens has to remind us, if you look back, like you'll see the description of his manner and appearance, but also the fact that, I guess this isn't the first time that we have an interpolation in the first chapter, but that to me really exacerbates that sense of difference that you're pointing to. I mean, if I've been waiting a month, as in fact we have, for the next part, and we come back to it, and it's pretty much starts with this really tonally different feeling.
If this is the first issue ever picked up, you'd be like, whoa, that's what this is about. And then, you'll get to the next chapter and it's hijinks. But it is, it is unusual. And that reminder that he gives right off the bat that, like, a brief description of whose manner and appearance concluded the last chapter that you said. We were talking earlier, like, I'm thinking like people are like, oh, where's my issue from last month? Like just to remind themselves of what happened. And it was it's old Jack Bamber. He actually has a name, but that name isn't used here. But it's old Jack Bamber is this old man who was never heard to talk about anything else but the inns. And the inns are where these lawyers live and work, the inns of court. And he has lived alone in them till he's half crazy. He is a little yellow, high-shouldered man whose countenance, from his habit of stooping forward when silent, whose countenance from his habit, is given him a shriveled face, a gray eye, and a grim smile, and he has nails of extraordinary length. I mean, this guy's like a horror figure. This is like the scary, guy that comes out of the corner in a horror movie. And he has, and they remind the other clerks kind of prod him to tell the story, and he jumps up and he's like, yes, I'll tell the story. And he starts, though, he doesn't go right into the tale. He's going to go into all this, talking about how these young clerks, they start off in these inns of court, and then over time they go mad from studying too much, just being in books and not with people, and from loneliness. And it's
to the question about whether the tale of love fits with these tales of horror.
Yeah,
it's very interesting to me the way he describes. He says, there's not a panel in the old wainscoting, but what, if it were endowed with the powers of speech and memory, could start from the wall and tell its tale of horror dash the romance of life, sir, the romance of life. That sort of tale of horror, romance of life,
Well,
melding together, I
yeah,
think it's quite telling about what these interpolations are doing.
but the romance here for me though, isn't romance doesn't mean romantic love yet. And this is always an issue where people are trying to figure out what romances were in the past. What romance has come to mean is different than even in Dickens's day. And I did a little research on this just to remind myself of it. I mean, for everybody, the Middle Ages, stories were written, romances, they were legendary or extraordinary adventures of a hero and a chivalric quest. And then the word romance comes to mean over time kind of any fictitious narrative, in prose almost always, in which settings or events are kind of remote from everyday life, like sensational or exciting things would happen. It could be supernatural as well, but it's at least just very sensational or exciting. And then,
but my sense of the usage is that it is characteristically distinct from horror.
yes,
Like,
it is.
Gothic, oh gosh, the new Zoom upgrade takes some hand gestures as instructions. I don't know what's going on there. But that contrast, I think, is still part of what's happening there.
Yes. And I'm just reminding people that he doesn't mean, romantic love. That word actually doesn't mean love story until shortly after, probably right around this time, but it's more the rest of the 19th century and later that people start saying, a romantic love, a story of two lovers is a romantic story. Doesn't start to happen until just coming up now. And then they don't even use the term romance doesn't describe a book as a love story until the 20th century. But I had to point it out just because he keeps mentioning it. It's that, like you said, that quote from Romance of Life, and then the old man says again, there's romance enough at home without going anywhere else. And Mr. Pickwick says, I never thought of the romance of this particular subject before. And that for Mr. Pickwick, what he's realizing that just these mundane inns of court where these clerks live could be something extraordinary, where sensational things will happen. And they do. He proceeds to tell us about different stories where people are killing themselves and ghosts are coming back, or just somebody dies of an apoplexy, and then he lays there, and then one day they force the lock and they find his skeleton in a blue coat, black knee shorts, and silks fell forward in the arms of the porter who opened the door. Still a little humorous, the way it's portrayed there. And then
what about the ghost who he convinces should really go out and see the exciting places instead of sites of horror is hilarious.
That's really funny. And then the other story is the ghost that comes out of the press, and this exchange is very much like Marley and Scrooge later on, right? That the ghost comes out of this press, and that's a big cupboard. And first he hears a faint groan, and then he comes out, and who are you? And the ghost says, don't throw that poker at me. If you hurled it with ever so sure an aim, it would pass through me without resistance and expend its force on the wood behind. I am a spirit. And then he tells him, when you have the opportunity of visiting the fairest spots of earth, or I suppose space is nothing to you, you should always return exactly to the very places where you've been most miserable. Egad, that's very true. I never thought of that before. And this great little exchange where he tells him, tell the other ghosts that too. Make sure you tell the other ghosts. They shouldn't stick around. They should just go wherever they'd like. I can't imagine how we have been so stupid, the ghost says. That's fun stuff, right? And so we think like, oh, that's what we're going to get. we're going to get this fun tale. Maybe these ghosts are, don't realize that what they can do. And the title is The Old Man's Tale About the Queer Client. And the other story, the Tom Smart and the queer chair. So maybe you think like, oh, that kind of queer story, something really odd, but it's not going to be horrific, and it's horrific. It starts in the Marshalsea prison, which for everybody is the debtors prison. Your little dark, it's good you're wearing. Is that why you're wearing the little dark shirt? Would you be tying it in?
Right, we got the Marshalsea roots. In fact, this is the Marshalsea.
Yeah. And in that novel, also set partly in the Marshalsea, it's the debtors prison in London. And that's where in England, the law was you were in prison. If you had debts and you didn't pay them, you could get arrested and you go to prison until the debt was paid. And they later revised this law and changed it, but it was the harshest in Europe.
And where Dickens's father was imprisoned.
He was, when Dickens was for 3 months, his father had a debt of £40 and was in prison there. There were more debts would have been coming into. It was like the 40 that he was, I think, arrested for, but there were a lot of other debts that were about to come in. And Charles was 12 at the time, and then Dickens's mother and Charles Dickens's mother, so his father and wife and 3 of the younger children all went to the prison because your family could live there with you, but you had to pay for them. You had to pay like rent, and while you're trying to clear up your debt as well. It's just a crazy law, and that like, oh, you won't pay the debt, we'll put you somewhere where you can't make any money. Like it doesn't make any sense at all. And it went on for a long time. In 1826 to 1827, there were 753 people imprisoned for debts under £5. And it's just, it's just crazy that this went on so long. And the conditions were horrific. As he'll describe in this for a little bit. But just to get back to Dickens's life story, this is kind of what really, it comes to influence Dickens so much. He not only, has this story here, it's in Little Dorrit too. It features prominently. And actually there'll be a
David Copperfield.
And David Copperfield. There'll be a scene later in Pickwick it's not the Marshalsea, but that will have some more of this kind of inspiration for it. But Charles had to visit every day. He had to go. They sent him off to live alone. They just like rented. He just lived with someone and got a job. But every morning he had to walk like 5 miles to the prison so he could have breakfast with the family, and then walk to his job, which was at Warren's blacking factory, in which he had to paste the labels on the bottles of blacking as shoe polish. And then he would walk back to the prison for dinner with his family and then go home. And he never really forgave his parents for this, and especially the fact that when his father's finally released after 3 months, there was some little bit of an inheritance that he got. He was able to clear up his debts. Dickens's mother suggests that, well, maybe Charles should keep working. Maybe that would be a good idea. And he's like, what? He wanted to go to school and do things. He winds up becoming a lawyer's clerk for his first job. But his sister Fanny, the whole time, was at a music academy, and she stayed there the whole time. And they never stopped paying for her music academy. But Charles would have to go to. I mean, it's also the gender difference, and they recognized that he was going to be the one that would have to make money, because certainly his father couldn't. There's a note here. Well, he goes on to describe it, the Marshalsea, and then how it's the streets around are mean and close. Poverty and debauchery lie festering in the crowded alleys, and inside the prison, the blight of disappointment and neglect. The faces wasted with famine and sallow from confinement. Debtors rotted in prison. But he also has this line: the condemned fellow has a good a yard for air and exercise in Newgate. And Newgate is the other prison, not the debtors. That's for like hardened criminals and murderers and everybody else. And in the 18, you might have a note in the edition that you're reading, but that note is not in the first serial. There's a note that Dickens adds in the 1847 edition about that that there's a better yard for exercise in Newgate than in the Marshalsea. And Dickens's note says, better, but this is past in a better age, and the prison exists no longer, because the Marshalsea winds up being closed. I think in 1846 it closes finally. So he's able to get a little, he's even thinking about it. And that's interesting for me, because it's a, you know, as he's putting together the new edition, he's again reminded of, I'm sure, of like the Marshalsea and his own connection, and he has to write a note about how this place isn't there anymore. So I think if he doesn't have the personal connection, he doesn't come up with that idea for the note. Well, the story is, let's just do very briefly the story. It's George Hayling. He's in the Marshalsea for debt. His wife and infant daughter come to visit him. Then they both die. And he's very bitter about it, because we learned that his wife had a father who was wealthy but refused to help them. So he could have helped the daughter, you know, and like he didn't have to, it's not even like you could have got me out of debt. He could have at least taken in the daughter, and he doesn't even do that. And then he has these delirium dreams where he's killing the old man. He's on a ship and the ships go down, and he sees the old man and he drowns him. And then he has another one where in the desert and he stops him from drinking water in the desert. And then in real life, he's literally at the seaside one day and he sees the old man and his son. The old man has another younger son who is swimming and drowning. And the old man's like, help him. And he's like, ha, 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 I'm going to watch him die. Like the most wicked melodramatic villain of a play. And he does. And then Hayling hires a lawyer whose job is to financially destroy the old man by buying up all his debts and forcing payment right away. The old man flees. Hayling finally finds him, and they have this final confrontation. Let's share the image of that. That's because that's the first Phys illustration of the story here. And this is Hayling and the old man here. Let's zoom in on
He's even dressed like a melodramatic villain, right?
Yeah, he's got the cape and he's got his arm out. And he's completely, and he's so much bigger. I mean, look how little the old man is, this little wizened old man who has been destroyed by this young man. Maybe justly, he's gotten his, but it's all revenge. And I like the little candle here. I mean, this is a really nice illustration from Phys here, isn't it? To really, set the mood for this. Just this single candle, as he's been in hiding here and he has discovered him, the look of disgust on his face here as he's looking at him, and the fear on the old man. And the hands are clasped, but he's not really praying. He's pleading for himself. We don't get a sense of, anyone coming to any kind of kind of religious conviction in this. The story ends. There's no redemption. There's no forgiveness.
Nor is there any apology.
No. It's just harsh. At the end, it is. He said, and it's a long story. Dickens really plays this out, and the delirium scenes, I think, are really exceptionally well written. But what fresh misery is this? The old man says, what do you want here? And then he says, Hayling says, tonight I consign you to the living death to which you devoted her a hopeless prison. And then he looks at him, but he's just died. And read the last paragraph there, beneath a plain gravestone.
Beneath a plain gravestone in one of the most peaceful and secluded churchyards in Kent, where wild flowers mingle with the grass and the soft landscape around forms the fairest spot in the garden of England, lie the bones of the young mother and her gentle child. But the ashes of the father do not mingle with theirs, nor from that night forward did the attorney ever gain the remotest clue to the subsequent history of his queer client.
It really does surprise me that Dickens is so, there is so much, a central theme in all of his works. For me, one of the central themes is forgiveness, and something that always he seems to need to happen in stories. So even for him to just have a small tale in here that is just so harsh, and it's just, I got my revenge, that's the end of the story, is a little odd. But that's only odd for me knowing all the rest of Dickens. It's not going to be odd for, his new readers coming to this.
But it is interesting that, unlike a lot of the other tales, even in Pickwick, Mr. Pickwick does not know what to do with the story either.
Listen, yeah.
I mean, he just we don't get anything. He kind of just slinks out uncomfortably.
Yeah, well, but even with the story itself, it's not even, as there's no forgiveness and there's no kind of, but even he kind of suffers too, hailing. I mean, Dickens at least is making that point that, because he's just sought revenge, he can't rest with his wife and daughter forever. But Mr. Pickwick is just, Mr. Pickwick departed unnoticed. He doesn't really, seem to know what to do with this story. And just find Sam and they leave. So no commentary from Mr. Pickwick. Just, leaves. Well, and that takes us to chapter 22, in which is Mr. Pickwick journeys to Ipswich and meets with a romantic adventure with a middle-aged lady in yellow curl papers. And I feel like that's what we signed up for. That's where I want to go. I do like this, story of the queer client, though, as a kind of standalone tale. It works well, and it does remind me of what Poe is doing, in America. And we know Poe read this. He reviewed Pickwick Paper. He reviewed it under a different name. I can't remember the name. It was, bootleg published under a different name, and he does review it under a different name, I think. Or maybe that was the Sketches. I'm sorry, that was the Sketches. But Poe reviews Pickwick Papers. I should find that review and mention it in one of the shows. But just those scenes in it, those scenes of madness when after his wife dies, are reminiscent of things that Poe will wind up doing, and Poe's very much influenced by Dickens. And we know the Madman's Manuscript tale from earlier in this, Poe really, has there's similarities between that and the Telltale Heart and the Black Cat, but that Poe is definitely influenced by the way Dickens puts these tales together.
Even that sense of death cheating him of his truest revenge at the end there.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. All righty. Well, Mr. Pickwick and Sam are going to Ipswich to find Jingle and Trotter. Sam's father, Tony Weller, has told them, he described him. He's like, yeah, I took those two guys to Ipswich on my coach. So they know that that's where he is. And here we have Tony Weller. Let me share. I love this. I love this kid illustration of Tony Weller. It's my favorite one of his of illustrations of him. Yeah, I like it. Here we go, because it's in color. I love this one. There's there's something like really disreputable about him too in this one. A lot of the others, he seems very jolly. He's very jolly in the text. I get that, but there's something about this that makes him seem a little more it's something with the face here that he looks not quite evil, but like not the quite on the up and up. And he's got his long pipe here, his long clay churchwarden. This glass looks rather fancy though for Tony Weller. It's even got like a stick here with a with a garnish in it or something. This is really unusual, but the rest of him is exactly as he's described in the text. Some of the pictures of him turn out to be he's so heavy that he's just like this giant balloon of a man. But I like this one. I like the look in his eyes that Kid caught here, that I'm not quite to be trusted. But also a guy that would be fun to hang out with. So, and we mentioned when I shared that picture on our Facebook group, somebody posted about the long clay churchwarden pipes. So behind me here, there you can see one on the wall there. Well, I've taken the other one down, and this is how long. I mean, and his pipe in that picture is even longer. But this is a long clay pipe made from clay that people would smoke, especially in inns and public houses. And it's a little hard to light because it's so long. But this is how long it is. Or I can put it right up to the screen and be like coming at like 3D here, coming at you. But they would also darken over time too. This one's like, very oily, and it starts to come out, all the oils in it. And what you could do is I could put this pipe in a fire, in like a fireplace, and it'll come out white. But just reheating it to a point in the fire will all these oils will come out of the pipe. So they could refresh them then. So I don't know how I'm going to continue to smoke this during the show, but I'm going to give it a shot. I'm so far from the mic now.
You just need a nice martini glass.
Yeah. So I've got the mug with some ale in it today. I do have smaller clay pipes that are a lot easier to smoke. But this is a pipe that also Sherlock Holmes smoked. He has an oily, disputatious clay that he smokes, and his clay pipe is mentioned more than once in the stories. So I'll have to bring this out for the Sherlock Mondays show too. There we go. All right. Yeah, there's no way to do this and do a show at the same time. You got to keep coming back into the frame. And this pipe, my clay pipes, these are this one isn't as dark as the other one. This is an older one that I have, but this is Santa's right here. That's why. Many years on Christmas Eve, my kids were in bed, Santa would visit, and he and I would have a nice churchwarden clay pipe. And the kids would wake up in the morning and I'd say, look, Santa and I had these two pipes. And there we go. So he stopped visiting now. The kids are grown. Mr. Weller here, Tony Weller, Sam's asking how it's funny they meet each other. They ask you, like, how you doing? How you been? Like, they haven't seen each other in a long time. Well, at first they haven't. I hadn't seen him in like 2 years. And Sam's asking about Tony Weller has remarried, as we keep getting reminded that he married a widow or a widder, and he is very upset. He's always giving advice about don't marry widders. And now he tells a story about how his wife is getting methodistical, and that's really upsetting him. And we'll tell the story first. And the story is, he sees a little bill posted tickets £0.50, all applications to be made by committee, secretary, Mrs. Weller. And he's like, what? It's for a big tea drinking thing for this, for this Methodist preacher. And so he goes himself to check it out, and he's there, and it's all women except for one lanky chap with a red nose who's, brings the preacher in. And the preacher comes in, and he's a fat chap in black, with a great white face, a smile and a veil like clockwork. And when the tea comes in, at it they went tooth and nail. I wish you could have seen the shepherd walking into the ham and muffins. I never see such a chap to eat and drink, never. And then when the preacher, after eating and the tea, the preacher asks a question. He's preaching to all and it's all women, and all older women, it seems, mostly. And he says, "Where is the sinner? Where is the miserable sinner?" Upon which all the women looked at me and began to groan as if they was dying. And then Tony has to call him out. You want to read that part? My friend says I.
Yes. Let's see. My friend says I. Did you apply that air observation to me? Instead of begging my pardon, as any gentleman would have done, he got more abusive than ever. Called me a wessel, Sammy, a wessel of wrath, and all sorts of names. So my blood being regularly up, I first gave him 2 or 3 for himself, and then 2 or 3 more to hand over the man with the red nose, and walked off. I wish you could have heard how the women screamed, Sammy. Then they picked up the shepherd from under the table. Hello, here's the governor, the size of life.
I mean, it just punches him in the face. Knocks him down. For calling him
a vessel.
a vessel of wrath. And I'll show you what a vessel of wrath is. And Dickens loves to make fun of ridiculous clergymen, and the whole methodistical thing. You'll find a lot of this in novels, especially common novels at the time. John Wesley founds the Methodists in the 18th century, and the whole idea of this kind of new birth that you have. And for Weller here, it works so well as the contrast, because he's the kind of representative of mirth, of fun living, food, smoke, drink. You see it in all the pictures. He's doing it in every scene that he's in, it seems, against these kind of hypocritical pretenders of morality, as Dickens usually plays them up as. This is a frequent theme, but this even pops up in the later, one of the later prefaces, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's first in the 1847 cheap edition preface, and then he uses pretty much the same paragraph in the 1867 Charles Dickens edition, but he defends himself against the sort of allegation that this is a profane passage insulting Methodists. He says, what have we here? Well, it's a pretty long moment, but unless there be any well-intentioned persons who do not perceive the difference, as some such could not when Old Mortality was newly published, between religion and the cant of religion, piety and the pretense of piety, a humble reverence for the greater truths of Scripture, and an audacious and offensive obtrusion of its letter and not its spirit, in the commonest dissensions and the meanest affairs of life, to the extraordinary confusion of ignorant minds, let them understand that it is always the latter and never the former which is satirized here. And he goes on and talks about what he gives some examples, and he cites the example of Jonathan Swift, who critiques those who have just enough religion to make them hate and not enough to make them love one another. But he really, he spends a big paragraph in this quite short, few-page preface defending these sorts of jokes about these pious frauds that he is making fun of in moments like this one.
Yeah, and this is a stance he's taken in other novels too. I can recall this language in defending himself in other places too, but it's all about the kind of, Dickens is, his satires are he's always directing against the hypocrites of morality, very, very frequently, and especially if they're religious. Now he hasn't gone too much into who this, we'll get more of this. This is like a taste. This winds up being another, we get more of this story later, I think. Like, I'm remembering that right. I hope. But I think this continues later with his wife and this preacher, Weller's wife and this preacher. All righty. Well, now they're going to get into the coach. And there's also another man in the coach with them. Oh, someone else has asked a comment here about long pipes and has mentioned the fact that one of the reasons that they're so long is that what would happen was people would use it and they would break off an end and then somebody else would use it. That's actually not the case. And we know that's not the case because people didn't understand germs yet. They were still, that's not part of how you get sick, that germs are passed through contact that way. So they're just long because they're convenient to have that long at the fire. And actually, it doesn't have to be this long, but a longer pipe is easier to light because usually you would light it with a long piece of straw or a stick or something longer. So if it's long, it's easier to light. If it's all the way up here, it's a little tougher to light with a rush light or something like that. So it was easier to light because it's long. I often think they're just so long because as it would gradually break, it's still usable. If it's short and as soon as it breaks, it's no longer usable, but this could break a few times and it's still fine to use. So anyway.
Of course, it probably breaks more often too. So
it does, but a little, and people just seem to like this, and it's enjoyable when you're just sitting by the fire to smoke this, as I used to do with Santa. But it is it's tough to do on a show when you're trying to talk and do it at the same time. They're all getting on the coach here, and there's also a red-haired man with an inquisitive nose and green spectacles. Dickens loves describing in minute detail their appearances, and he loves adding odd features to it. Here it's the green spectacles.
Well, we have a lot of, red hair is always suspicious to the Victorians.
Yeah.
Right, who see it as a kind of mark of dangerous sexuality or something like that. And then in this novel,
that makes it even more ridiculous,
In this novel, we keep green as a green as a red flag in the Pickwick Papers.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to make of that, except that this guy.
Because earlier we had it for earlier that we kept talking about the umbrellas. What was it?
Yes, and then Jingle.
And Jingle, yeah. So in his green coat, yeah. The red-haired man is an important-looking, sharp-nosed, mysterious-spoken personage with a bird-like habit of giving his head a jerk every time he said anything. Smiled as if he had made one of the strangest discoveries that ever fell to the lot of human wisdom. So a very supercilious character, very, self-centered and also odd in a way, not self-centered and in the kind of, way that he holds himself off from people. It's just really odd and expresses himself strangely. But what I find interesting here is that Pickwick's not taken in by him, as he seems to be with everyone else he meets. But this might be the first odd character he meets that he understands that he's foolish. When he gives him his card, he says, and his name's Magnus, Peter Magnus, PM. I sometimes sign myself afternoon to people, and he thinks that's hilarious. That's kind of cute, but it's not hilarious. And
Pickwick doesn't think so.
Yes, and it says,
envying the ease with which Mr. Magnus's friends were entertained.
Yeah, I mean I don't that might the Pickwick doesn't usually do that, meeting strangers. Maybe usually strangers, he's taking them at face value and like, oh, you must be extraordinary, kind of person. And he doesn't do that here. And maybe this is I don't think Dickens is intentionally trying to develop his character, but I think he does change over time as Dickens is writing him. Naturally, he just starts to change. And
There's a wonderful passage about that too in that same 1847 preface, where he says, no, sorry, this is the 1867 preface. But he says, it has been observed of Mr. Pickwick, there's a decided change in his character as these pages proceed, and that he'll become more good and more sensible. I do not think this change will appear forced or unnatural to my readers, if they'll reflect that in real life, the peculiarities and oddities of a man who has anything whimsical about him generally impress us first, and that it is not until we are better acquainted with him that we usually begin to look below those superficial traits and to know the better part of him.
Good. It's like we planned this exchange here, Jake. Like I told you, I've forgotten these prefaces. So, that's yeah, and it seems to be what's going on here. Like this is, and for me, this is the first moment I'm really noticing that it's starting to happen.
And I wonder too if he's still a little bit if that strange tale he's still a little off his ease.
I think it's the Mrs. Bardell thing. I think it's the fact that he suddenly wind up like he can't believe that this is happening to him. And it's the moment in the book where I mentioned when we had I think it was last month, that he realizes that he hasn't done something foolish. He's just been misunderstood, and now he's going to suffer for being misunderstood. It's much different than falling asleep drunk in a wheelbarrow. Like, that's his own fault. And then he gets in the pound, and then he can laugh with the others after it. This is like, oh, you're being sued for a lot of money, and it's not really your fault. You were just misunderstood at the time. And I think that there's a change in the comic scenario there that we'll have going forward too.
Agreed.
Well, just as they get on first the red-haired man has to have everything must be unpacked and repacked into the carriage because it's all not right. And we have to, get it all set to go. And he's being ridiculous about it. Is all my luggage in? All right, sir. Is the red bag in? All right, sir. And the striped bag, 4 boots, sir. And the brown paper parcel under the seat, sir. And the leather hat box, they're all in, sir. And then he says, and then he has to get everything out and inspect everything, make sure it's all set up. So it winds up being, he winds up being very silly. And then we get not a Wellerism, but something that's close. Well, no, it's a Wellerism from Tony Weller that is, it's definitely a Wellerism, but it's so short that it's almost not noticeable. Did you say it? It's the jump up in front, Sammy, said Mr. Weller. Now, Willem, run him out. He's talking to William, the kid who's going to run the horses out. Take care of the archway, gentlemen. Heads, as the pieman says. Heads, meaning take care of the arch, because you're going to hit, but it's as the pieman says. And what he's referring to is to toss the pieman, and Henry Mayhew writes about this in London, Labor and Poor. Dickens actually refers to it in Dombey and Son too, is that you could go up to a pieman and you would flip a coin, your coin, and if the pieman wins the call, then he gets your coin and you get nothing. But if you win, he gives you a pie and you don't have to pay him. And so tossing the pieman was an ordinary thing, and the pieman always calls. You don't get the call. So it's heads, says the pieman, but here it's the heads, better duck or your head's going to get knocked off, as we have the great story from Jingle earlier. So I didn't notice it at first. I was like, oh, wait, let me get back there. Oh, that's right. It's a Wellerism from the true Weller, from the first
senior.
Yes, from Tony Weller. So And then as they drive out, not a nice neighborhood, this, sir, said Sam with a touch of the hat. As they go up, and they're a Whitechapel here, the very densely populated quarter. And then I love this quote from Sam here. It's a very remarkable circumstance, sir, that poverty and oysters always seem to go together. Seems odd to us now, and that, oysters are a kind of delicacy. Oysters aren't cheap. But oyster sellers, especially in a port city, everywhere. Philadelphia too was filled with oyster sellers, oyster houses, all leading out from the docks in Philadelphia. Now you've got to, it's hard to find oysters, and you've got to make sure they're prepared right and all that.
Well, I suspect that's another part of why they may have been so cheap, right?
Yes.
Risk. And that's the same with gin, right? Which another odd thing looking back to be so associated with poverty, but that makes sense when you think about the processes and
and their gin too. Like when they say gin and it's the poor people drinking gin, it's just alcohol. They're like, it's it's not juniper berries, it's just rough out. It's like, it would be like almost like American, like moonshine kind of thing, although the alcohol content wasn't as high. But it could be even more dangerous, the gins that they would drink. There was one place making true gin in the way that that it was made in Holland, and you also Hollands, and we'll have that in number 10 when Gabriel Grubb mentions that he's drinking Hollands, which he means is the gin that's like the gin in Holland. And they did make that in England in one place, and I can't remember what it is, and it's still there. There's a distillery that still makes gin the same way, and I buy it sometimes, but its name is out of my head. But obviously they're saying oyster sellers everywhere, so they know it's a poor place. And then they pass the pike keeper. There's a turnpike at Mile End, and they have to pay a toll. I think we had this in one of the earlier issues too, where they came up and had to pay a toll. This is, it's for the upkeep of the roads.
Well, when it was in the chase scene, right? And he gave them bad directions and wasted their time.
Yeah. And now we get another one, and this is, Tony Weller tells them about their very queer life is a pike keepers, sir. And then he says, because they're kind of misanthropes, that they've met with a disappointment in life, so now they have to live by themselves, and they take their revenge on humankind by taking their money to travel on the roads.
Tony had been with them the first time. They could have caught up much faster.
Yeah. So, and then we're going to get on to the White Horse in Ipswich. But before we do, let me take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow Dickens lovers worldwide. And I want to thank everybody who has donated to the show or become members over the last several months, and to encourage you, if you have not, to please do that. Any donation helps. You can find out how to do that at our website. You could also become a member. Membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, and exclusive invitations to member-only events. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website, and a Rosenbach membership makes a great gift. Our latest biblio venture, Sherlock Mondays, is now running weekly. Have you gotten to watch Sherlock Mondays yet, Jake?
I haven't yet.
All right. It is, if you want to have some fun in between your Pickwick episodes, you can tune in live on Monday nights, in which I do the same format. It's myself and rotating co-hosts at 7 p.m. Eastern on Monday nights. We do it live. You can always watch the replays on YouTube. Sherlock Mondays is also an audio podcast. We take the audio out of it. We take just the audio out of it and post that as part of the Rosenbach podcast. It's the same show. It's just you don't see me smoking and drinking while you're listening to it. We are working our way through the stories of Sherlock Holmes in the order they were published up until the adventure of the empty house, because we actually have the manuscript for the empty house. And that'll be about half the stories of Sherlock Holmes that we will work through. If you register for Sherlock Mondays, which you can do at our website, I will send then weekly emails to you about what's coming up on the show. And you can watch all of the episodes so far. I think we're up to number 6 right now. But who knows when you're watching this episode, but you can watch them all at the Rosenbach's YouTube channel. There's also a Facebook group for both Sherlock Mondays and Pickwick Monthly. You can join us there for lots more info, news, links, conversation, and fun. And remember, you can always write to me at epettit@rosenbach.org. And if you do, I may share your questions or comments on this segment here called The Corresponding Members of Pickwick Monthly. I had a note from Paul F. from Lawrenceville, New Jersey, and he writes us, "Dear Ed and corresponding members of Pickwick Monthly." Thank you, Paul, for getting that correctly. He says, "Returning to Eatanswill in number 5 a few months ago, but perhaps interesting as election day approaches in New Jersey and Pennsylvania." He says, "Step out of the Rosenbach and cross the Delaware River to enter the land of the buff and the blue. Buff and blue, or more specifically, buff and Jersey blue, are the official colors of New Jersey. George Washington gave the colors buff and blue to the New Jersey militia in the Revolutionary War, taking them in turn from his own uniform as a colonel of Virginia militia in Fairfax County, apparently adopted in 1774 for association with the Whigs of Parliament. The flag of New Jersey shows the great seal of the state on a background of buff. I say the colors work," Paul says, "echoing the water and sand that comprises our garden state." So surrounded by water on 3 sides and holding the unique soils of sand and clay from the Pine Barrens and further north. I'll leave it to others to make the comparisons, and I'm sure the jokes on the politics of New Jersey and Eatanswill. Sincerely, Paul F. from Lawrenceville, New Jersey. Victoria W. writes me from Washington, D.C. "My dear Edward Pettit, would you believe that today's Washington Post," this was on October 3rd edition of the Washington Post, "features an article about Thomas Smallwood, who is a shoemaker and Underground Railroad operator, who, inspired by Dickens, wrote under the pseudonym Sam Weller Jr. And this was about 20 years before the Civil War." Victoria writes, District Pickwickians, be proud, Washington, District of Columbia. "Loving our Pickwick Monthly sessions. Thanks for all you do, Victoria W." In this article that she mentions in the Washington Post, there's a book by Scott Shane right now called "Flee North: A Forgotten Hero and the Fight for Freedom in Slavery's Borderland." It is about Thomas Smallwood, who was born into slavery. He's a Black man. He was born into slavery in 1801, and then he was later freed at the age of 30 and became a shoemaker in Southeast Washington's Navy Yard. And while he was running his shoemaking business, by night, he was organizing Underground Railroad escapes. He would organize the travel up to 18 enslaved African Americans at a time, men, women, and children, and then would write articles about them in newspapers using the pseudonym Sam Weller Jr. And he would write what in this Washington Post article says, "withering newspaper columns designed to troll the enslavers whose walking property had walked off," as Smallwood put it. After each escape, he would submit a detailed recap to an Albany, New York-based abolitionist newspaper, and he would quote from the advertisements of the runaway slaves things that they had put out. Of one white enslaving family, Azariah Fuller and his son, Smallwood wrote, "The great blockheads cannot yet account for the mysterious disappearance of their man. Let me explain it for you, sweet sirs. When you sent him down the avenue on that errand, it is true, you thought you watched him very close, but there were many people in the street at the time, and though he was in his short sleeves, your eyes might fail to fix on him. Just at that particular moment when he slipped into the door of the apothecary shop on the corner of 11th Street and out of the other that opens on the back street." And then the newspaper would actually mail copies of that newspaper with a column in it to the, the slave owners, just so they knew that, like, we freed your slaves for you. So that's Thomas Smallwood using Sam Weller Jr. Thanks for pointing that out to us, Victoria. And lastly, Henrietta J. writes with some observations from last month's number 7. First, regarding the lion symbol on co-host James Armstrong's Dickens tie. Let me share this picture with you. Oops, it's not there. I have to open it. Last month, James had a tie on that I had asked him about. I hadn't, we didn't. I just saw he was wearing a tie, and I was like, "Ooh, what's the thing on your tie there?" And it turns out it is. He shared this, and you can see it's this lion. There's a star here, and it says Charles Dickens. It's 2012, so it was the bicentenary year for Dickens, and we talked about like some kind of Dickens crest thing, but we didn't know what it was. And this is Charles Dickens's book plate. And Henrietta had written to me that it's the family crest. And it turns out Dickens had designed this for his book plate. According to the New York Public Library, which you can find information on this, John Dickens, Dickens's father, traced the family line, perhaps fancifully, back to the 16th century, and his son Charles claimed that a crest was originally granted to one William Dickens, citizen of London, in 1625, using it on many of his personal possessions, including his silver, and as here, his book plate. Dickens described the crest, which was designed for him in 1840 by John Overs, a London cabinet maker, as a lion couchant, which means lying down for heraldry, bearing in his right paw a Maltese cross. So this is Dickens playing the thing that William Shakespeare himself did when he applied for his coat of arms. Like, I am a gentleman now. And here is my, family crest to prove it. So thank you for clearing that up for us, Henrietta. Henrietta also writes this observation, and which I thought was really well said. She wrote, "The book is still working in episodes. Only now plot lines are developing, which lead to a next step showing some connective tissue. CD is gaining control and testing his own ability to write a sustained action developing over length and time. 2 potential threads appear with Jingle, which seems low budget interest, and with the Bardell situation. He isn't writing to describe someone else's illustrations. He is no longer being a miniaturist." And she writes, this will lead to Christmas at Dingley Dell, which will happen in 2 months, and we'll see more from that then. That I find interesting, Jake. This is because I'm seeing that too. I'm seeing that he's been just like funny episode. We still get a little of that here with the Lady in Yellow Curl Papers, but he's also starting to show, especially in the last month's issue, that kind of, okay, I could see where this story is going to go now. And the Mrs. Bardell story is clearly the one that's going to bring us all the way through, or at least towards the end.
Yeah, and I also associate that shift with beginning with the arrival of Sam, right? That sort of shift from the club as the core narrative units to the duo as the core narrative unit. at least seems to index that shift. And I wonder, as we go forward, we should keep an eye on whether we might think about ways in which it seems to sort of cause it. Because it's that presence of that relationship, I think, that developing relationship rather than the static relationships among the members of the club that gets some of that rolling, I think.
Right. All right, everyone. I'd love to hear from you all. So if anyone has a question or comment about the serial part for the month or just Dickens in general, don't hesitate to drop me a note at epettit@rosenbach.org, and I may feature your note on the segment, The Corresponding Members of Pickwick Monthly. All right. Ipswich, the Great White Horse Hotel. They have arrived. It's still there, everyone. This is an actual place. Let me share some pictures of it as it kind of looks today. Actually, these pictures are a little bit older, just like a few years older. Here it is, the Great White Horse Hotel in Ipswich. You can see the horse up here above the door. At one point, these were just shops down here. It has since been new ownership. There's the white horse above the door. It has since been reopened and as a hotel. And I was looking at reviews online and they were all really bad. It's not like a really nice place to stay yet. But I think there's some kind of effort underway to make this a really nice place again. But here's a picture I really wanted to share because this is a watercolor done of it. And you can see the horse over here on the left above the door. And it's this family hotel up top. This was a watercolor painted by Henry Davy in 1859. So, a little bit after when this story is. We see White Horse Hotel over here on this side, up here. The carriage entrance would have been down way to the past the point on the left. He didn't get the carriage arch there, which you could actually see in the newer pictures. You could see the carriage arch over on the left here. This is where the carriages would have driven in to the hotel on either side here. Maybe it was in and out. I don't know. And there would have been a courtyard somewhere behind these walls where they would have come in and let people off. But I love this watercolor, especially for the time that Dickens is there. And Dickens stayed there. Dickens stayed there later in life when he returned, but he was also there when he was covering elections in Ipswich as a reporter before in 1835 or 1836. He had been in Ipswich. Whether or not he stayed at the hotel then or stayed somewhere else, we don't know. We know he did stay there later when he returned later in life as an older man. But what's fascinating is I'll stop the share here. What's fascinating is that he's not nice about how he describes this place. And the Great White Horse Hotel loved the fact that they were in Pickwick Papers and always told, they even advertised the passages from the novel where he describes it as, the labyrinths of uncarpeted passages, clusters of moldy, ill-lighted rooms, an overgrown tavern. They were like, hey, everybody, look, we're in the Pickwick Papers. Come visit. And they had a Pickwick room that you could come and stay in for a long time. That would have been the room that Mr. Pickwick stayed in. So I think it's fun that Dickens, because he uses real places, he then starts this kind of, industry of Dickens Land. There's a new book out right now by Lee Jackson. I think it's Lee Jackson, called Dickens Land, about all the places that you can visit in England and what they've done over the years to kind of promote themselves. And it's Dickens himself who starts this by talking about places that people could visit that he had already visited. Even when he's not saying that this is a great place to stay. And he also exaggerates too, right? He describes the horse statue as a stone statue of some rampacious animal with flowing mane and tail. distantly resembling an insane cart horse, which is elevated above the principal door. And if you look at the picture of the horse over the door, I'll share it again here. It is not rampacious and look at it. It's just like a horse, like just cantering slowly here. I don't know if that's his memory of what it was to him, or he's just kind of exaggerating it for effect because that would be funny. But this doesn't look like some mad horse about to trample you down. It looks kind of nice.
Well, maybe it's like the chair. Maybe when he showed up,
yes. So it's a queer horse.
That's right.
Well, they go into this overgrown tavern because this place is so huge. Well, first they meet this corpulent man with a fortnight's napkin under his arm. This is apparently a waiter, who slowly desisted from his occupation of staring down the street on this question being put to him by Mr. Pickwick of, whether or not his friends are there yet, if Tupman is there yet. And he's a little bit rude, or it's just indifferent towards these guests that are coming to stay. And then he leads them down a long, dark passage, usher them into a large, badly furnished apartment with a dirty grate in which a small fire was making a wretched attempt to be cheerful, but was fast sinking beneath the dispiriting influence of the place. And they Mr. Pickwick and Mr. Peter Magnus ordered a bottle of the worst possible port wine at the highest possible price for the good of the house, drank brandy and water for their own. So, the Great White Horse Tavern was like, hey, everybody come stay here where Pickwick stayed. But I guess they weren't so bad, and they knew people would come and enjoy themselves, and it wouldn't be like that. And now Magnus reveals here why he's come to Ipswich with his little he's, his little laughs, which are just, why then? He said Mr. Peter Magnus with a bashful titter. What should you think, Mr. Pickwick, if I had come down here to make a proposal, sir? That he's not the romantic, the love interest hero kind of person here. So that's, I think part of the ridiculousness of this. He also, I don't mind telling you, Mr. Pickwick, although I'm dreadful jealous by nature, horrid that the lady is in this house. This is a premonition of what's going to happen, next month. The lady in the house and the jealousy of Mr. Peter Magnus. And so that's it for now for him, right? What he says, Magnus also he's asked the lady here because it's a good inn. An inn is a good sort of a place to propose to a single woman. She is more likely to feel the loneliness of her situation in traveling, perhaps, than she would be at home. So a bit of his strategy there, which doesn't seem very nice about him. So to kind of manipulate her into saying yes to him. They head off to bed, right? And Mr. Pickwick is led to his room by a servant so he can find it, which is important. He needs someone to show him where the room is, and they find it. And then he realizes that he has left his watch on the table downstairs. Sorry. And he has to go get it. But this place is so huge, right?
It's too late to call a servant, it says.
Yeah, so he's going to have to go off on his own now. It's never too late to call a servant. You're in an inn. Ring the bell. Somebody will come. But he figured, what's the big deal, right? I'll go down and get my watch. I'll be fine. This will be easy to do. But then, of course, it's, the more stairs Mr. Pickwick went down, the more stairs there seemed to be to descend. And again, when Mr. Pickwick got into some narrow passage and began to congratulate himself on having gained the ground floor, did another flight of stairs appear before his astonished eyes. Passage after passage, room after room did he peep into, and he finally finds the room. There it is, my watch. Now he's got to find his way back. The whole scenario starts over again, rows of doors. He keeps opening, he'll touch that doorknob of a door, and then somebody will say, "Who the devil's that? What do you want here?" Oh, that's not the right door. So he finally makes it back on tiptoe, finally finds his room. There's the two beds. That's what I remember. The fire's still burning. And now he gets in, and apparently there's a chair, like the curtains around the bed are enough that you can have a chair there. So he's in the chair next to the bed and getting ready for bed, divested himself of his shoes and gaiters, took off and folded up his coat, his waistcoat, his neckcloth, and then put on his tasseled nightcap. I was wishing I had one to put on today. I would put that on here. And did you ever wear a nightcap, Jake?
Can't say that I did. I don't totally understand
Well, when it's cold, it's, it would make sense when you live in a place where that's where the curtains are there to keep you warm in the bed. If it's going to be cold enough, it would make sense, but they've gone away. So you don't see that so much anymore.
Only in Christmas Carol adaptations.
Yeah, that you have a nightcap. I mean, I have a nightcap every night, but it's not that kind of nightcap. He ties his nightcap on, but he actually ties it secured firmly, tying beneath his head the strings. And then he laughs about, again, this is Mr. Pickwick laughing at the kind of, person that he is. It would have been delightful to any man of well-constituted mind to watch the smiles that expanded his amiable features as they shone forth from beneath the nightcap. This is where we're starting to see the beginning of this kind of, paragon of joy that he kind of will come to be in this novel. And he's just laughing. They're like, I just got lost in an inn. Isn't that hilarious? By myself at night. And then suddenly someone comes in the room, but he's behind the bed curtains, and someone comes in the room, and he had no time to call out or impose their entrance. Who could it be? What's he going to do? And he kind of peeps out and looks, and it is, why don't you read Mr. Pickwick almost fainted there.
Mr. Pickwick almost fainted with horror and dismay. Standing before the dressing glass was a middle-aged lady in yellow curl papers, busily engaged in brushing what ladies call their back hair. However, the unconscious middle-aged lady came into that room. It was quite clear that she contemplated remaining there for the night, for she had brought a rushlight and shade with her, which, with praiseworthy precaution against fire, she had stationed in a basin on the floor, where it was glimmering away like a gigantic lighthouse in a particularly small piece of water. Bless my soul, thought Mr. Pickwick, what a dreadful thing.
He's caught with the lady in yellow curl papers. And it's, I never met with anything so awful as this, he thinks. And this is fearful. It's and then it's alarming. She's getting ready for bed. She's just sitting there. If I call out, he says, she'll alarm the house, but if I remain here, the consequences will be still more frightful. Maybe she'll climb into the bed, and there he is. That would be worse. But what's really fearful, right, is the very idea of exhibiting his nightcap to a lady overpowered him. But he had tied those confounded strings in a knot, and do what he would, he couldn't get it off. So he's more concerned about like saying, hey, I'm here, because he's in his nightcap, and he doesn't want the lady to see him in his nightcap. Well, he finally calls out, and she doesn't hear him at first, or she just thinks it's, something else. And then he calls out, and she says, "What's that?" And he says, It's only a gentleman, ma'am," said Mr. Pickwick from behind the curtains. "A gentleman?" And she screams, and he thinks, oh, it's all over. And then he peeks out here, and this is the other Fizz illustration, which I will share.
One of the very funniest.
And here he is peeping out of the curtains. This is when she's still brushing her hair. So actually, this Fizz is combined. Well, no, because he does peek out earlier and sees her. So this is just before that. So I did share it too late. So this is when he first peeks out, and he sees her still brushing her hair, brushing her back hair, meaning that she pulls the hair up that goes down in the back, or is usually kind of tied up in some kind of bun here, and she's brushing that out. The yellow curls or curl papers are in front here to curl the front. Here's her headdress, their nightcap that she'll put on when she's done there. And this is the light, I guess, she has on the floor. And then this is the water that she's going to throw, like she's got ready to throw in it. I don't know. What's that passage about? That she's ready for any flame that might happen. But here he is looking at her, middle-aged lady in yellow curl papers, and his look of shock. And there's his tasseled nightcap. I have to get one of these. I'll ask my wife to make me one. She can make these things. That would be fun. And I'll wear it in the winter. So when it's cold.
Just don't tie the strings too tight.
I will not tie the strings. And he says that the sudden apparition of Mr. Pickwick's nightcap had driven her back into the remotest corner of the apartment, where she stood staring wildly at Mr. Pickwick, while Mr. Pickwick in his turn stared wildly at her. And then he tells her, he's like, please, you have nothing to worry, upon my honor. He says, "I am almost ready to sink, ma'am, beneath the confusion of addressing a lady in my nightcap." Here the lady snatched off hers, "but I can't get it off, ma'am." Here Mr. Pickwick gave it a tremendous tug in proof of the statement. So this is the dilemma. The dilemma isn't that he is caught in a lady's bedroom late at night. The dilemma is he's in his nightcap talking to a lady in the middle of the night. So there's only one place you wear your nightcap. That's bed. So that's clearly. It does. It all just seems just overly silly that, this would be the what's really upsetting him. He's exceedingly sorry. And then she finally, she says, "Well, get out." And he does. And bows his way. I love this here. Whatever grounds of self-congratulation Mr. Pickwick might have for having escaped so quietly from his late awkward situation. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Just before this, I just want to hit the moment where he's so sorry. But she points to the door, and it's one excellent quality of Mr. Pickwick's character was beautifully displayed at this moment under the most trying circumstances, although he had hastily put on his hat over his nightcap after the manner of the old patrol. Meaning the old patrols, the watchmen would go out in the middle of the night to do things. Although he carried his shoes and gaiters in his hand and his coat and waistcoat over his arm, nothing could subdue his native politeness. "I am exceedingly sorry, ma'am," said Mr. Pickwick, bowing very low. And she's like, "Then get out." Then get out. He's taking the time to keep apologizing, bowing, being as polite as he can. And she's just trying to get him the heck out the door. Well, he is out and then realizes that, oh no, I have to find my room. And not going to be able to find my room. He was alone in an open passage in a strange house in the middle of the night, half dressed. It was not to be supposed that he could find his way in perfect darkness to a room which he had been wholly unable to discover with a light. So he just finds a little recess in the wall, and he's just going to wait there till morning, as philosophically as he might. But of course, to the rescue. Well, first, it's to his unspeakable horror, a man bearing a light appears at the end of the passage, and it turns out, though, that it's Samuel Weller, who was sitting up thus late in conversation with the Boots. So remember, everyone, Sam used to be a Boots at the inn where Dickens, where Pickwick meets him, and he still enjoys. He's sitting up with the Boots, and the Boots. Everybody is all those rows of boots outside the doors. You'd put your boots outside the door, and then the Boots would come up and clean them for you, and they'd be ready for you in the morning. So the Boots worked overnight or very early in the morning before you got up to clean your shoes, because in an age when almost everywhere you went, there's not, concrete sidewalks and walkways. You're just walking in dirt and mud all the time and other things. Sam comes and rescues him and takes him to bed. And Sam says, "You rather want somebody to look after you, sir, when your judgment goes out to visiting." So you rather want someone, you need someone, is what he means, to look after you when your judgment goes out a visiting. So what do you mean by that, Sam? Said Mr. Pickwick, as he raised himself in bed and extended his hand as if he were about to say something more, but suddenly checking himself, turned around and bade his valet good night. Mr. Pickwick realizes, you're actually right. I do need somebody to look after me. And that's Sam's job. That's a nice little reminder there, isn't it, of who Sam is to Mr. Pickwick and how he needs him. The last chapter of this part is chapter 23, in which Mr. Samuel Weller begins to devote his energies to the return match between himself and Mr. Trotter. That would be Job Trotter, Jingle's assistant, who has gotten the best of him. And luckily, fortunately, again, we start with Tony Weller at the beginning of this chapter, who's driven the Ipswich coach there. Now he's going to leave and head back. And we get this, we've had a description of him when we first met him. And Dickens can't seem to resist describing him again. Like, we've gotten most of this. We know what he looks like. Maybe he just forgot, or maybe he's just like, oh, I need to say it again. Or maybe you've forgotten. Maybe you didn't remember a few parts ago. We've talked about, but yeah, he in great detail. It is very possible that at some earlier period of his career, Mr. Weller's profile might have presented a bold and determined outline. His face, however, had expanded under the influence of good living, and a disposition remarkable for resignation, and its bold, fleshy curves had so far extended beyond the limits originally assigned them that unless you took a full view of his countenance in front, it was difficult to distinguish more than the extreme tip of a very rubicund nose. He's got the double chin, while a chin that is generally described by prefixing the word double to it, which is this nice sentence construction there for the joke. And his complexion is one of underdone roast beef, which I like a lot. But just in general, the point I want to make is, and then he goes into minute detail about how he's dressed and all his clothes. And this is what I mentioned earlier. This is something Dickens loves to do. He's as the author, he's the great stage impresario as an author, right? He's controlling every detail of his production. Like, the scene opens, here's Tony Weller at the table, describe him in complete detail and all his costume. And then and then he describes what's on the table. And then another character walks in and they begin their, and I always feel like it's a scene on the stage as Dickens is writing them. And here it's a pot of ale, a cold round of beef, and a very respectable looking loaf. It's better than an unrespectable looking loaf of bread. And that's what he has. And then Sammy comes in and immediately picks up his pot of ale, which I will do, and nodding significantly at his parent, took a long draft by way of reply. Very good power of suction, Sammy. You'd have made an uncommon fine oyster. As I'm saying that, he's on, like, I almost hear the W.C. Fields thing going on too, which will be macabre later in David Copperfield, that kind of clipped diction and the way he, talks. And Tony Weller is upset that Sam was tricked by Job Trotter. Like, he let herself be gammoned by that Mulberry man. That this is, it's like an insult to the Weller name that someone was able to trick you. You're supposed to be tricking him, not the other way around. And then I have to point this out. It's horrible now, this kind of statement that he says then, you know what the council said, Sammy, as defended the gentleman as beat his wife with the poker whenever he got jolly, meaning I guess drunk. And after all, my lord, said he, it's an amiable weakness. This kind of, it's worse than just this kind of casual, it's like this casual misogyny about domestic abuse, which is really like doesn't sit well with us anymore. But I can't help but think that this is the age of Punch and Judy too, right? A kind of violent puppet show that Dickens himself loved and wrote about. Punch and Judy turn up in several of his novels and referencing people watching them, where half the play is Punch beating up his wife with a little bat and being mean, and then Punch also gets it too. So it's that, but it's that whole. I mean, this isn't even more so than now. This is because this is an age where violence kind of happens so much in everyday life that I guess is this just Dickens's way of employing it as a humor, or is it anyone would employ it as humor? Is it just happens, so we make fun of it in ways? Is that a way of making it more palatable to them, or do they just not think that this is a big deal?
Well, and who's they? I mean, you don't find the equivalent of this joke in too many women writers of periods. So.
Yes, there you go. So they're not making that crack. That this is, the men will make this crack and they won't. So well put there. And then we get, and then Mr. Well rings the bell, orders more ale. And then we get almost a Wellerism. When he calls out the coaches. For coaches, Sammy is like guns. They require us to be loaded with very great care before they go off. So not quite a Wellerism, but that same kind of structure. He's like comparing.
Also, one the previous paragraph. That's one it's over and can't be helped. That's one consolation, as they always say in Turkey, when they cuts the wrong man's head off.
Oh, I missed it. You're right. That's it. Because Sam does one. Yes. Thank you. Sam has one. I totally missed it. That was it. Yeah. Read it again. Read it again.
Another not great one, but.
Yeah. It's over and can't be helped. And that's one consolation. As they always say in Turkey, then they cuts the wrong man's head off. So that's the other Wellerism that we needed to catch. So they're just trading lines. They're just trading lines here, the two of them. And then Dickens really kind of plays up the humor of these guys here with this solemn oh, well, first he's got to give Sammy the advice, and remember, if you're 50 years old or upwards of 50 and you want to marry anybody, just kill yourself. And he tells him exactly how to kill himself. Don't do it this way. Don't make sure you poison yourself. So hanging's vulgar, you got to poison yourself and then you'll be okay. And then this is Dickens' point, the narrator, with these affecting words. Mr. Weller looked steadfastly on his son and turning slowly upon his heel, disappeared from his sight. The kind of solemn departure after this advice of exactly how to kill yourself if you're going to marry a widow is a little cringing, but a little funny too. And that one I don't mind because he's not saying kill the widow, kill yourself. So well, then this chapter will end, fairly quickly. I almost got the feeling that it was nice to get this Weller on Weller dialogue here, but I wish there was like a chapter of that, right? Like I wish they continued that, because then we just have, when Sam goes and he sees Job Trotter and finds him, I almost feel like it's just like filling in, like just, okay, now he's got to find Trotter. So here it is. Like Dickens didn't have like a really clever way of him coming across him, any fun scenario. I would have much rather had, the Wellers continue out the rest of this chapter.
It's also very hard. The description is quite hard for me to visualize, of him screwing up his face so strangely that he's unrecognizable.
He sees him and he says he was contorting his face into the most fearful and astonishing grimaces that ever were beheld. I don't think I have ever seen that used as a form of disguise. Like, oh, I know, he won't, I'll make a face and he won't know it's me. Like, would that ever work? So I think that's fun, and I think that's the humor in this, but but it is really weird too. Because Sam's like, I swear that's him, but I've never seen him making that face before. And then he's like just making this face as he's walking by him, like he won't recognize me. And he does. And he calls him out, and Trotter tries the whole tears thing again, and oh, I'm so happy to see you, and I'm I'm so sorry that my master did this to you. But this time Sam's having none of it. Sam's not going to get taken in again, and he even sees it. He says, there was a momentary look of deep slyness in Job Trotter's eye as he said this, which ran a thrill through Mr. Weller's clenched fist as he burned with a desire to make a demonstration on his ribs. And he's using what he's learned by Trotter to get him to come to the hotel, because Trotter has said he's wooing this cook that lives in this house where he saw him sneak out of. And I think we can piece it together, right? He's sneaking out in the morning from a house, meaning he's probably spent the night there. What would he be doing spending the night with this woman? I mean, he had his nightcap on. Let me just say that. And Sam's not threatening with revealing this. Sam's threatening with like, oh, I'll, or I will cut in there myself, or something he says. If you don't come and meet us at the White Horse. So he says, I should be asking after you at the other side of the Green Gate, and then I might cut you out, So of this cook who Trotter is wooing, to put it politely, with his nightcap, which wouldn't be polite. So there you go. And that's it. They're going to meet. He comes back and tells Mr. Pickwick that he's running to Job Trotter, and they're going to meet. And he's got a detailed plan of action. And when is this to be done, Sam? Inquired Mr. Pickwick. All in good time, sir, replied Sam. Whether it was done in good time or not, we'll be seeing hereafter, because that's the end of the page count for this part, and I'm gone. I do really feel like Dickens was like filling up the rest of these last couple pages. Like he doesn't have this isn't an very interesting scenario of him running into Job Trotter, and I wish he had used that time with the Wellers. So,
but it does save us time next month.
we're right in, like, we're there. That's, you know, we'll be right there for the rest of this story. And that's it. Any else, anything we didn't hit for you?
I think we got it pretty covered here. That last sort of family visit inspired detectivizing by Sam we have, and I guess that is him doing what he said at the end of the previous chapter he was going to do, right? He's taking care of Mr. Pickwick where Mr. Pickwick can't do it himself.
Mm-hmm. And Sam's also, you know, he has vowed that he's going to get his revenge on Job Trotter himself. He doesn't like.
It's interesting, isn't it, that we start and end the number with revenge?
Oh yeah, a plot to revenge here. Yeah. So, well, let's hope they're not, like, you know, watching children dying and, you know, all that for their revenge.
I think we got a better vision of revenge in
Well, Pickwickians, thank you for joining us for number 8 of Pickwick Monthly. Jake, thank you for joining us again on our Pickwick Travelers. You'll come back in a few months, I hope.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up next month, everyone, my Pickwickian co-host will be Kevin Quinn for issue number 9, chapters 24 to 26, in which we get jealousy and intrigue, and Mr. Pickwick and Sam are arrested. And there's a daring rescue attempt, and both Mr. Jingle and Mrs. Bardell will make an appearance next month. Again, let me remind you to subscribe to our channel, to like these videos. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. Thank you so much for everyone who has donated. You can also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, and I'll see you all next month for number 9 of the Pickwick Papers. May you always have somebody to look after you when your judgment goes out a-visiting. Thank you. Bye-bye, Jake. Bye-bye, everybody.